Welcome, everyone. I'm Angelo Robles, and welcome to Family Office TV and my Family Office Masterclass. You can follow me on all my multiple of social media platforms and learn more and truly engage at angelorobles.com. Today, among the most anticipated, not only guests, of course, but topics, and one that I admit I probably was a little slow in terms of coming around to. But judging by the responses of the audience, this seems to touch what feels like everyone, and that is converting or considerations in converting your single family office, SFO, into a multi-family office, MFO. Our special guest today, and I would have no other to have the fortune of leading a discussion with on this topic other than Jamie McLaughlin, founder of J.H. McLaughlin and Company. Jamie, welcome to the show.
Great to be here, Angelo.
In terms of a little bit of context, I guess from my perspective, one, I've known Jamie for many, many, many years. I could say decades, or at least it feels like that. Jamie's one of the most thoughtful people in the community, one of the most connected. And again, no other person I'd rather have on this topic than him. It's almost inevitable that a single family office at one time or another will consider morphing into a multifamily office. Of course, they believe they have the secret sauce. They will crush it. It will be a true profit enterprise and make the family and the executives in the SFO converting to quote unquote an MFO more money. Now, expectations for the family may also be to attract quote unquote higher level talent for themselves internally in the multifamily office, AKA they can pay more as well if the economics work out. And you could argue they may look at the SFO, I would disagree, but as a cost center, and it's a way to offset that. But on to my first question now after my initial commentary, Jamie. What are the wrong reasons to transition from an SFO to an MFO?
Well, there's a lot of dynamics implied in that. An interesting approach. What are the wrong reasons? I think the wrong reason is that it's purely perceived as an economic opportunity. I think most single family offices, and for that matter, those commercial wealth management firms that self-identify as multifamily offices, and there was never a single family to begin with, underestimate how hard it is to create operating leverage, to get margin expansion, to do the things that need to be done on a repeatable basis, or shall I say replicable basis, that can create productivity or efficiency. It's hard. The demands are idiosyncratic, typically. The requirements are customized to deliver solutions to each incremental new family. And it is just very hard to do it profitably.
And we will get into the economics. And yes, the fact that it is hard. Jamie, I remember probably a good 10, 11 years ago, someone that we both know and respect, Mary Duke, mentioned to me, you know what, Angelo, your own SFO, you do what you want. It's like your own kitchen. When you look to convert to an MFO, which may or may not be the right move, you're opening yourself up to kind of be in a restaurant. You're a commercial enterprise. You'll have oversight. You'll have greater commentary from the outside. It almost makes me wonder if it's really worth it at the end of the day. Now, that's more of a comment than maybe specifically a question. The multitude of my 20 questions today will probably dive into that, and we'll maybe circle back to that comment as we have a little more context for the audience. But what are the pros and cons, keeping it high level at the moment, pros and cons for transitioning an SFO into an MFO?
Well, the first one, of course, is if you have a highly rationalized platform providing solutions to your single family, the opportunity to do I call it a shared service model for other families to join is pretty self-evident. You can spread presumptively the fixed cost against more top line revenue paying families. And that's an important consideration when you when you are the first family, you want to lower your unit cost for the family office. But that gets into a lot of considerations for how the family office existed to begin with. Was there an operating business that provided them some form of income? Was there a partial interest of some sort? And how did they perceive those costs? Were those costs marked up and assessed, an assessment taken against the households of that family? Did they have some form of what I would call profit awareness, efficiency awareness, productivity awareness, tautness in terms of work process? And typically they do not. And the challenge then in bringing on other families that are presumptively being brought in for some economies of scale is to really create a culture of profitability. So it may be perceived that this is a way to lower their cost, but I think most of the family offices are not accustomed to the drivers, cultural drivers of what will be required to create true profitability. So there's a degree of indiscipline in terms of their ultimately taking an assessment approach to a pricing approach. It's not evenly and consistently applied. And then last, the main consideration on the expense side is the talent. It depends on the model, but 65 to 80% of the cost of any of these commercial enterprises or family office that takes on other families are people.
Of course.
And the people factor can be as high as 80%, can really get very high. The key with that expense is that it is typically not a group of people that are properly utilized. So not only are you taking on more staff, more presumptively expensive staff, but until such time as they're fully loaded, they are low capacity utilized people. So they're expensive in terms of their direct costs, and they're expensive in terms of their indirect low utilization. And I don't think most family offices anticipate that they need better staff to go commercial, to go outside, and they need to be patient in terms of the time period to which they will become fully utilized. So it's expensive.
That is an extremely important comment that you made that we are going to do a deeper dive into a little bit later, because I think that kind of gets a little bit to the crux of it, relating to people. Not only are the biggest expense, they're rightfully so the most important quality or aspect in an SFO or an MFO. But if you're going to build, especially an investment-centric team, and you're competing against high-level, traditionally commercial firms, that becomes a challenge from recruiting to compensation to retention. But why don't we save the deeper dive in that into a little bit later? Related to even my first two questions, and I guess you hinted at the answer to this question in both of them, but we'll do a little deeper. What are the economics? So I think that sometimes single family offices may underestimate kind of what you just said, and I followed up on, that you're going to have the right talent and resources. That's going to cost upfront capital and money. You may need marketing initiatives. You may need a marketing director. These are costs that begin to add up, and there's no guarantee your MFO is going to be able to make it and be financially sustainable.
Yeah, I've seen some successful transitions, though, Angelo, and they would be in either industry verticals, other operating principles they knew in their industries, or many times more likely in regions where the family office, well networked in their community, can circle pre-launch of the commercial enterprise, can circle some other families. Now that obviously is a head start, but that your comment about the marketing people and the people that are going to be part of the growth engine, that's another factor altogether. But if they have an ability to grow, they're intentional about their growth, they know the kind of people that they want, and they pre-circled them, it's actually quite an advantage to get started with that head start. And it can really make the economics much more attractive. So rather than launching and then announcing we are open for business for new families and then attempting the client acquisition process, much different economics, because the realization rates on new business over 2 or 3 years can be really slow. Families don't make decisions to take all of their affairs to one other family easily. They do it in set pieces. They might do it for certain reasons. Some professional service that could be something that would add to what they're doing with their outside advisors. But they're all equipped to get the same processes. They're not equipped to just deliver everything to that family office on day one. So not only do they not get the full mandate, it just takes a long time for them to bring over enough revenue to rationalize what are the immediate needs on the expense side for the staff costs that I mentioned before.
Two important questions come up that will dive into those responses much deeper. But audiences sometimes like to get a little bit of a comparison. So I think of a couple of organizations that I would believe started as a single family office and have now grown or morphed, converted into an MFO. Some of them recently, some of them a long time ago. Bessemer, Pictarian, Ford Estates, Techless, I believe it's pronounced, Simon & Quick, New Republic Partners, Geller. Although a little different, even MSD. If you could comment from your experience about maybe those that are newer to the transition and those that have done it for decades and decades.
Well, you've mentioned a bunch of firms. Interesting, isn't it? I'm not sure if there's any uniformity in the group you mentioned. The last one, but the last one you mentioned, MSD, I think was a process that was clearly on the investment side and distinctive in being on the investment side. I think it's interesting to note that the others that you mentioned largely were staffed to deliver across the two traditional domains. I'll call them verticals, the investment, and under this big umbrella, planning in many different areas, subsets of planning. I entertain that there's a third vertical that would be required. In that vertical, increasingly the demand is for information management, data, assimilated data. And to the degree that you've mentioned 7 or 8 different types, the older family offices, you mentioned Bessemer, I think you mentioned Glenmead, I think I heard Pitcairn. Those are, in the case of the Pew, Phipps, and Pitcairn families, great American families that, in fact, open their doors to others. For different reasons, their capital structures are slightly different. But the notion was that there was an operating business. The operating business is now gone. And this was a source of income that, could substitute for the loss of that income. Pretty smart. But the economics of those two firms, Glenmead and Bessemer, imply that the family needs to get paid first. So what remains of whatever the profitability is then paid out to the remaining ownership, which is typically the employees in both cases. So their margins in the two cases of the two firms, Glenmead and Bessemer, their margins are actually quite low. They're in the low 20s. You go to a different model that does not have the same planning requirements, does not have all the planning pieces, and you get a different outcome. That would be an MSD, and that can be very profitable, very profitable. They make no claims to walk the dog, and they are in the position to take both a management fee and a performance fee. So there's a carried interest approach to what they're doing to, in fact, recover quite a bit of profitability while not having to embed a lot of cost to deliver the planning side. So the extremes I just mentioned are those two. Well, you get into the multi-generational family. Again, those are two great leading families that you mentioned. And you have a lot of households. You have a lot of people. And so therefore, to those that are older, multi-generational families, they have some pretty heavy expenses, and they're typically assessing each of those households some form of a fee. but that the Ford family today would be an example of a 7 or 8 generation family that has stayed a single family office and not taken on other families. But, that's a pretty big enterprise, 50 or so people that work for that family office. And so when you get these variations, it's hard to say there's a uniform approach to answer your question. I don't know if there's a uniform approach to answer your question, but some can be quite profitable if they stick to their knitting, as does MSD.
Of course. And I threw Ford Estates in there as a little bit of a, to see if people would be aware, because obviously that's generational, that's unique. That is a traditional family office. I'm assuming they may have considered kicking the tire, as I think any successful family office does for a variety of reasons, not to have a negative tonality to it, but when they elect to move forward and they fail, is it because of a lack of patient capital, leadership, and the right people?
Well, you're always going to get. I mean, I think the 4 conditions that exist for success for a multifamily office, and they're in this order, are capital, leadership, strategy, and the last one may seem simple. It's not: execution. They're all, to one degree or the other, imperatives. They all present risk. But starting from the top, the capital structure issue. I don't think it was entirely a surprise that the William Simon family office joined to create Simon Quick. That's no surprise. Similarly, there was a family in Richmond, the Massey family, that at the time joined Signature in Norfolk, Virginia, now part of Brown Advisory. I think there was a general view in both cases where they were perceived to be acquired by commercial multifamily offices, that the other enterprises had gotten to scale, had gotten to a position where using a replacement cost approach, that they could get better service for a lower unit cost if they were, in fact, to merge, I think would be what they were calling both of those deals, the other firms. Don't confuse the Richmond Massey family with Massey and Quick, the predecessor to Simon Quick. But I think there was a general view that they could lower their actual costs for running the family office. And that's the challenge for a lot of family offices that are just not big enough. And, this is one of my pet peeves. I've said it in the public domain a lot. There are just way too many subscale family offices. They make no economic sense. They never made any economic sense. The worst of those breed are those that are smaller, I'd say less than 500 million, and the operating business is no longer around. They're the worst of breed because I don't think that they, in their generation 1, I don't think they have any real sense that their need for control, their need to do it themselves is a 2.5%, I've seen 3.5% cost structures against the assets that they have. I'm talking about the balance sheet assets, not the liquid assets. So it's a very, very expensive enterprise when they could go to a commercial wealth management firm and do it for 1 or 1.5%. So I don't think people, until they've tested what the real costs are going to be, realize how expensive it is to do unless they have scale, big numbers. And I put the number out there as bigger than $1 billion. And so it's a natural act, I think, for a lot of families that finally come to the truth that this is really expensive, that they might join forces with another family or another commercial wealth management firm, as did the Simon family and the Massey family in the case of Signature Brown Advisory. I just think it takes a while for people to realize how expensive it is.
For sure. And this is likely an area, not the topic today, where Jamie and I probably have some disagreement on. There tends to be a focus in the industry on the investing side, and investing is the anchor for many families. It's the sexier topic, I do understand, but there's far more. The greatest threat to the family is the family: capacity, capability, competency, the rising generation, and a tremendous family office, which is few and far between in the single family office community. I get it. If they focus on family continuity, which includes investing, but that happens to really only be a part of it, I think that would be the true value, even for smaller SFOs. But we'll save that subject for a different time. A very important question, a little bit related to what I said, and everything that you said so far is what services make up an MFO? How would you define an MFO? And I think we all would agree you're an RIA at best, and probably not that good of a one if all you do is investing. So it does imply multifamily office, that you're doing family office services for a multiple of families.
Well, let me get it out of the way here so it's clear. Every Tom, Dick, and Harry claims they're a multifamily office now. So let's just put that out there. The term has been expropriated for usually marketing reasons. It's just, it's a fairly universal tagline that somebody's got a family office group, division, or approach. I think that's a hollow promise. The matrix of services, my firm created something about 10 years ago, tried to dumb it down to get it into a single page, but I think there's 78 items on it with 11 headings, subheadings that follow, that cut across, I already mentioned the three main areas: investment, planning, and information management, or the latter, I might call it household financial management, but it's data centric. But the planning regime is the one which is the biggest and the widest. The investment one is the hardest. It's the most expensive, but it's the one that's most easily rationalized, and it's the simplest to look at. It's the planning regime that can, without being too glib, can eat your lunch. If you are in the position to provide at the top level, you mentioned it, the notion of it being virtuous, that the family is sustainable, and you are then entertaining family governance, family systems, family counseling. There's one where the expertise to do that, to be embedded, is extremely expensive. You may choose to outsource that. But then you go through, and that's a planning component part. There's a governance structure that's included in that. There's risk management. There's philanthropic planning. There's tax advisory as distinct from tax compliance. There's wealth transfer and estate planning, or the new term that's being used in vogue, legacy planning. I could go on. And to do all of those things well, and to have staff do all those things well, is, as they say in Boston, wicked or wickedly expensive. And so the basis for which I counsel firms that are entertaining to do this unlimited counseling role is to be very determined that they, on an opportunistic basis, have certain people that are really skilled and can carry the dialogue, but be prepared to outsource a lot of that at the outset, or you'll never make any money. And I think that's the promise to the family, that you've recognized that there are these needs. It's a very long list, and you can't be an expert at all of them. The latter one, though, I think is the one that is, in addition, another insidious cost or expense, and that's in this vertical I call information management, or I referenced household financial management. But there's a real requirement today for better information, not just investment reporting, consolidated reporting, partnership reporting, and accounting, but all manner of budgeting and a whole host of other, what I would call really cost accounting requirements that some complicated families have, that have family staff, have multiple properties, and they really want to have some approach, general ledger approach to where is everything on a sources and uses basis. So there's advanced bookkeeping and accounting requirements that go into this. And for the record, most single family offices, and I would say a clear, simple majority, if not a large majority, are still stuck in Excel spreadsheet land.
Exactly.
And there is a cloud computing revolution underway the last 5 or 6 years that have brought about many solutions, integrated systems solutions that can really bring to bear some real productivity enhancements and information management systems enhancements for family offices that I think that are finally coming into being. But there's been an aversion from most family offices to tackle those things because they're perceived to be an expense that they can ill afford. The demand for that if you're going to go to the MFO is very high. The expectation is that you will have those systems in place. So one of my big remonstrances to any single family office that wants to entertain taking on another family is they've got to really take stock of their systems, and most of them are weak. And it's a pretty big investment that needs to be made to make the transition to serve other families if you're going to deliver on the information management promise.
Nailed it. Yes. And the problem's worse, as you hinted, in the majority, especially of quote unquote smaller single family offices. When I'm asked, because people seem to like things in threes, what are the three most important factors, at least in an SFO, it's always people number one. That's by a mile. You could debate 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 and 6. In my opinion, I think technology has moved up to the second spot with some of the advent of, you mentioned cloud and AI and what's happening there. And what I would define as systems, which could be policy, procedures, protocols, even best practices, etc., as number 3. But you got to get that first one, people, right. What would be the biggest reason in SFOs, cheap, maybe is one, and MFOs for the fact that they're not getting that technology part correct? Is it only money, or is it a fear of executives to learn something new and to learn how to best leverage the technology?
Gee, I think there's real movement there. I think we're in a place you could have said that 5 years ago, but I think that comment is not well placed, Angelo. I think there's real movement happening within the environment of systems for family offices. Hey, the good news is that while they may have been defensively cheap and stubbornly stuck on Excel spreadsheets, there are real opportunities for them to do, on a replacement cost basis, do a lot of things for less. Just 10 years ago, pre-cloud computing, everything was on a point solution basis. So it was one app at a time. If there were apps available, you had the license, the deployment and installation cost, and then ultimately a training nightmare that most families didn't want to deal with. But the good news, most of them didn't try to tackle it. And in the meantime, we have remarkable technology that's emerging, and they don't have the legacy system that's holding them back, to which they have to, as a main architecture, they have to create a broader set of APIs and solutions to deliver on these other work processes. So today they can cross-purchase lots of common apps that are required to go from being a single family office to a multifamily office. Examples would be the onboarding process. Obviously, the most core one would be the consolidated reporting process. Apps, in addition to consolidated reporting, that provide partnership accounting are available today. They're great ones. A CRM, you can develop a lot of cross-purchased opportunities. Typically, if you have an integrator or systems provider that'll bring you through this web of SaaS solutions that have been developed. But product development has been really, really accelerating in the last 5 years. And I think there are great integrated solutions out there. The problem is that I think the family offices have been late adopters, but I think the opportunity now is to do that and actually lower their cost and increase their throughput if they go to the MFO. So it's a good news, bad news story.
The framework of my question, services to offer what makes an MFO, again, very commonly, it's going to be investing in effectively investment policy statement, asset allocation, investment selection as an anchor. Not always, but are you telling me that an RIA could claim, even if they're good on what I just said, that they're an MFO because they outsource everything else that, in my opinion, would make a family office? I mean, aren't you really just effectively an RIA that outsources everything else that you probably don't know that much about to begin with? And are you managing that process, or you just met someone on family governance at a conference, you think they're good, and you're making a recommendation that you may be getting a revenue share on? I could argue you're conflicted. Maybe you're a good business person, Now, again, I'm diving into the weeds here that are sensitive topics for some people, but you're the person to ask. What do you think?
Well, first of all, I don't believe in revenue sharing. So I think that creates principal conflict and is something that I would eschew in terms of the model. And I know that occurs, but I don't think it occurs too often. I think the right model is to be in an agent function for your client. And just to do that, I mean, at the extreme, you mentioned this notion on the extreme that the RIA would set itself up and be effectively a virtual family office. The presumption is they didn't do anything. Everything was outsourced. Well, I mean, that's a bit of a hollow promise. And I think there's something that needs to be at the core of what the firm does, some core deliverable. It could be one of the great family office services platforms that does all of the non-investment stuff and did it for a long time. Could be an accounting firm, could be a standalone, what I'd call family office services firm, was not an RIA. They could develop an investment apparatus that would require them to get into the investment business, take on compliance standards as an RIA. I mean, there's an entry there. The other logical entry into the business, which has been historically the way the business is developed, is the investment advisory firm started to do non-investment advisory services, started to do it on a uniform basis for very large and complex clients. And they were incrementally adding services and committed to bringing on the best people to provide those services. Now, that's delivering on the promise that is required from those idiosyncratic families. But it's a pretty hollow promise if you're the investment advisor, put yourself out there as a multifamily office and really choose to just outsource everything. So on the extreme, you have to do some things that are core. But I think on the other hand, there are some things that are truly, I'll call them extraneous, if not in some cases exogenous. I mean, they're just peculiar, odd. There's no way you should embed that solution on your staff. You'll have somebody that's expensive, that's underutilized, as I said before. So I think there has to be a degree of discipline about how far you extend your platform and how you put yourself out there as an expert. Let me finish on this comment because it's the trickiest thing in the world for the families to figure out. And it's, I'm not going to call it a moral question, but I think there are a lot of firms that put themselves out there to be experts and they're not. There is not any enforcement against that. And it is typically to many families that are not aware or are not intermediated to those families, they really don't know that that promise is hollow. I think it's a buyer beware. And I think in terms of a family that's looking for a multifamily office, if they're not intermediated, they should be asking a lot of questions and they should really be expecting the firm to be able to assert a long tenure of expertise in a particular area. And if there's any doubt, they should choose another firm. I think the good news is, and I estimate it now as around 60. I was saying 50, by the way, until recently. But I think there's a category of legitimate, scaled, what I'd call commercial multifamily offices. So there are many choices today that are really legitimate firms that can deliver on the promise. And I think that number will continue to increase.
Okay, I know a question the audience wants an answer to. We're kind of building up to it. How do you price out the MFO, especially if you're doing non-financial work? Is it a retainer? Is it hourly? Is it an hourly retainer, a yearly, coupled with AUM? How are the most successful MFOs doing it?
Well, that's an interesting. The most successful MFOs have been stubbornly using an asset-based fee because it's very profitable. But my assertion is that families of great wealth and complexity who require non-investment services won't pay. So at some point, there's going to be a pricing resistance. It calls into question whether or not the existing multifamily offices actually serve great families or just claim they serve it, because there is no interest on the part of families of great wealth and complexity to pay an additional dollar above a certain amount. And I'll use $100 million to start with. And it is also flawed, the asset-based fee for these large families. It's flawed that it doesn't really put attention on where the value is. Pricing theory rests on this premise that there must be consideration commensurate with the value rendered. I know that's theory, but that's the theory. But if you are asserting you're delivering value and it's a hollow promise, or you're not a discerning family who doesn't understand where the value rests, I suspect you could get away with an asset-based fee. But my belief is families with $100 million or more are purposeful, are smart. They typically made their money in an operating business or enterprise, and they're pecuniary. They are not frivolous. And so they're going to want to know where the value lies. And if they have particularly a business transition or a wealth transfer planning process across multi-generations, they're going to look and want to have real expertise, and they're going to be willing to pay for it. So on a building blocks basis, having the ability to say that you, on an enumerated basis, paid for these 1, 2, 3, 4, could be an infinite list, all of these items, and this is where the true value is delivered, that's the best practice. And it implies that the non-investment service should not be charged on an asset-based fee. So I'm a very strong advocate for a retainer. But the retainer approach can't just be pulled out of thin air. Now the burden is on the firm assessing the need to be able to enumerate where they're delivering that value. And in fact, whether they have to account for it on a time and effort basis, I don't think is necessary, but they need to be able to deliver a specific set of solutions that actually are part of what that bottom-up negotiated retainer fee would be. And there's developing, I think, some really good, some firms have a scorecard. They have a scorecard that actually anticipates a degree of complexity and where they're going to have to do certain work and how they'll charge for that accordingly. But you can't pull it out of thin air. Anyway, to summarize, I don't think families on a long-only active basis will pay $1 for additional investment services above a certain amount, but they will pay a negotiated flat fee for a whole host of non-investment services above a certain dollar amount. So the case is there for certainly a hybrid approach, or on an entirely different basis, a flat negotiated fee. Last point, you can't do that in the blind. I think most commercial multifamily offices tiptoe on fees. That is truly mistaken. There should be a lot of visibility on what you're charging and why, and on an annual basis, a review of what you did and a recapture perhaps of some things that you did because they weren't anticipated, but that you'll charge for the next year, and an annual truing up of what would be contained in that flat negotiated retainer. So the asset-based fee approach won't work for large families above a certain amount.
How much does the underlying family behind initially the SFO, now let's say they're looking to convert to an MFO, and now they have to register and do all that, how much do they have to reveal about their wealth?
Well, this whole thing is a real canard. It was a full employment act for a bunch of lawyers, 10 years ago when we had the exemption from registration legislation that came out of Dodd-Frank and took 5 or 6 years to get the regulations out. Never seen so, the sky was falling, according to many lawyers. I think it was much ado about nothing. The requirements for disclosure are benign in that you don't have to be specific about the actual dollars that you had as a single family office. You can remain benign in that regard when you take on other families to the degree that there was a first family and there are other families that are being brought in. But ultimately, if you are a full multifamily office, you're going to have to disclose the assets under management in your SEC Form ADV. But I think if on a standalone basis, you don't take on another family, I don't think the disclosure requirements were burdensome at all. And of course, to the degree that you did nothing for non-bloodline families, you didn't have to register at all. I mean, there was a pretty broad and clear exemption. But I do think if you're going to go into the commercial business and take on other families, I think people underestimate that it's not fun to go through the compliance. It's clearly not fun to have an enforcement action because you failed to disclose something. And the SEC, I think, looks at family offices that have gone into multifamily offices as a clear target because that's presumptively where the money is. They don't have a very great enforcement staff, but you certainly have compliance issues that you need to take on. And you'd be a fool not to do that really well. To the degree that I think it's a big risk, I think it's one that's generally not anticipated.
Let's dive into deeper a topic that we brought up earlier, because I think you'll agree as well. It kind of is integral to the whole subject that we're talking about. It may be a little dry to some, but I think we got to dive deeper. What are the personnel and compensation issues that will be encountered? So the best staff, at least on the investing front, without performance fees and the right compensation, why are they going to want to come over? If they're there, why are they going to want to remain there? So this also relates to the whole issue of claiming to be a fiduciary. But they aren't great on quote unquote and this and alternatives. I mean, this gets to be a little bit of the meat and potatoes, I think, of a lot of the issues that we're talking about, and maybe where SFOs that would potentially be good candidates to consider becoming an MFO may end up not getting right.
Wow, well, there's a lot there.
Yes.
I just as an aside, I'm on the advisory board of the Institute for the Fiduciary Standard, so I want you to know that I believe in that approach. But let me make it really clear. This may seem inconsistent. The use of the term fiduciary is mumbo jumbo. It's gobbledygook. And I don't think clients are willing to really understand what that means. I think the way that a firm would be advised to approach their approach as a firm is that they present themselves as in a better alignment with the client. Now you're talking. And that gets into the issue that you led with, which was the talent and people issue. So this may be heretical, but it's where I'm now exploring and probing and talking. So if you want to deliver for complex great wealth, where the demand, because of the great wealth, because of the demand they have for excess return and their willingness to accept some degree of illiquidity, and you want to bring the very best people to get the very best excess returning vehicles to those clients, and you're competing with an industry of product manufacturers, principals that are enjoying the benefit of a performance fee, and you're holding yourself out there that you only charge a management fee, you're going to actually lose your talent to the firm down the street that's operating as a principal and doing essentially the same work. So I have been presenting in forums and openly discussing that RIAs would be wise within the constraint of their disclosure that they may be able to, from time to time, operate as a GP, and whether they provide GP economics to their clients or not, but operate as a GP and be in a position they can choose to charge just a management fee. but possibly fully disclosed, say that for those investments, funds or directs that they're leading, that they would in fact take a performance fee, fully disclosed to the client, and possibly above a high water mark. Now, if I make an observation generally of the commercial wealth management firms, they don't have the investments that those clients want. And so they're going to go elsewhere anyway. And so I think there's a real challenge right now for, again, the category is about 60 firms, to come to grips. Are they going to hide behind the ruse that they're a fiduciary, or are they really going to deliver for their clients and get into the business of having access to best returning direct and funds as a principle? And I don't think it is out of bounds if it's fully disclosed.
I agree with you, but does that get complicated with putting themselves out and being a member of, being a certified financial planner?
Well, now that's a different matter. If on the basis that your entire de facto and de jure existence is that you are a certified financial planner and that you will operate as a fiduciary with a duty of loyalty and agency to your client at all times, you're never going to take on any kind of conflict as a principle. You're duty bound. So I think there's a class of people, Angelo, that we would put in a clear acceptance category. But on the whole, they're not working with the super wealthy.
That is true. It's a broad question, Jamie. You can answer it however it hits you. From the topic we're talking about, how is success measured?
Well, that's a great question. And I think that's the right way to look at it, because I think there are many non-financial metrics that could be applied in this generation of this category that I mentioned, this generation of firms that really grew up commercial multifamily offices as RIAs and are going through this generational transition, many with a capital sponsor. Secondly, the other class of entities we're talking about are the single family offices that are exploring taking under the families and considering being multifamily offices by any other name. Commercial or single family offices taking on, they're two different camps here. Now, how do you measure your success? Well, at the end of the day, you want to have some kind of a financial metric. But margins in this business and operating leverage in this business have proven to be hard to come by and long to be achieved. And I'm talking about a long time, years and years and years. And so margins in this area have been in the low 20s. It may not be a bad business for a single family office who wants the equivalent of a dividend, some preferred in the nature of what they could get. So it's not a bad business in that regard. But to be able to get the kind of margins that commercial wealth management firms and say the brokerage industry get, their margins are in the 50s and higher, is not going to happen. And so the question I think we really need to focus on is, what is success on a non-financial basis? My sense of a few things that are helpful, there are things that can be coded for. You can, in your general ledger, you can find markers and identify it and feather out these details. Two that come to mind for me that are really helpful. One is load management, which is kind of related to capacity utilization. But if you have a group of people formed as a team, a senior person supported by others, how much revenue are they bearing? I mean, it is a real big driver of the client experience and presumptively the client satisfaction and presumptively the client acquisition process related to referrals that come from well-served clients. But I think the measure of load management needs to be a really primary consideration. Just to throw some numbers out there for you. I think a qualified team that can carry the dialogue across all this complexity at a sort of a median number could carry $3 million and outside maybe $5 million. And most of these firms are way below that. So you can improve your capacity utilization on a load management basis. The other marker that I like to measure, and is easily measured, is client acquisition. Mm-hmm. Essentially the cost of acquisition. How much does it cost you to win a new client? And how long does it take that client to be profitable? Lots of ways to measure it. And you've got to sort of break out your expense structure in terms of allocating costs, direct in terms of marketing, let's say, or indirect in terms of allocating staff cost. But there's a way to figure that out. And to the degree that your cost of acquisition is potentially higher, it might mean that you are growing faster for a period of time. So a high cost of acquisition may prove in time to drive your top line. So it's a leading indicator of what in fact might be future profitability, but it's a non-financial metric, I think, that you can measure. But you've got to obviously you got to set your P&L up to feather that data out. But those are two big ones. But I think there's another piece here. There's just another piece, and it's non-financial. It's not cost accounting. It's delivering on the promise to serve clients, and the nature of the satisfaction that comes from doing good, from being virtuous, from delivering on the promise. I think it has incalculable value. And so to be stuck on some cost accounting metric, like I just said, some KPI, may be mistaken when you may be just simply doing good. And I think that's got real value.
Can just one family member in an SFO potentially stop the conversion to an MFO?
Of course. And I won't disclose it, but I worked on something a year ago with one of the great American families who chose not to move ahead with a project to take on other clients. Of course. And family continuity, family decision-making, intergenerational decision-making structures, patriarchal and or matriarchal obstructionist are legendary in the family office world. But I will also say, just to comment on that, Angelo, I do see a pretty big trend, a trend of greater governance, better governance, more purposefulness, greater sustainability. And what does that mean? I see a lot of young adult members of G2 and G3 who are earning their rights to sit at the table, who have gone to graduate school, who have advanced degrees, who believe they should have standing because of their competencies, and they want to have a voice. I see a lot of advisors, counselors to families. I don't do that work in the family systems and family governance area. Some psychologists, some lawyers. So I think the nature of the family structure that is leading toward intergenerational sustainability is now more the norm, and that caricature of that stubborn first generation wealth owner, patriarch or matriarch that is an obstructionist, I think that is fading into history. And I think there's a big reason behind it. And this may sound like a big idea, but I believe it's true. I believe when you get to great wealth, I believe if you don't do good, if all of those families simply are now wealthy and are behaving in a way that is not, from a societal point of view, doing good, I believe there'll be, ultimately, I know this is a crazy idea, I believe the Western democracies will be at risk and there'll be social unrest. So I think there's an implied need to be more virtuous, to be more purposeful, to be in a position to do good. And I believe a sustainable multi-generational family structure that has greater rigor in the ability for better decision-making is a better, more sustainable entity that can presumably do good.
Excellent response. And thank you, Jamie. And thank you to some of the comments, Natasha, Patrick, unidentified Mel, and some others that have come in. And my God, I think the first comment from someone on Twitch. I was waiting for that day for my 5 followers, whatever it is on Twitch, to have one person. I don't care what they say, make a comment. So thank you. And value BTW or something like that. I'll take it. Don't quite know exactly what you meant, but it's okay. A final, and unfortunately, I don't know how to identify who to give credit to this to, but it's not one of my amazing original thoughts. But I basically have comments on it, but I'm going to ask you, then we can say goodbye, Jamie. This person states, you could argue the exponential growth of the number of family offices is simply a creation of the bull market, which has now receded and left many of them nursing a clutch of overpriced assets. Only a limited number of SFOs, I would argue MFOs too, are likely to have the wit and the strength to prosper in the difficult years to come. That is a biting comment. It's a little bit of kick in the butt to SFOs, and I think they do need to get better. But I never like it's imparting. I think it is from someone who's from an MFO, and it might have been Scott Heyman at Norwood. I'm not sure, and he's not theoretically incorrect, but I don't like the implication that every MFO is some kind of amazing enterprise doing great work. They're amazing at everything. You said there might only be 60 that are really good. We have 50 states in the U.S. If you do it by number, that's not exactly a lot of good MFOs. But let me get off my soapbox. We all know I'm an over advocate of SFOs. That was a biting comment. What do you think?
I think it's sophomoric, and I think it's anchored to the past. I believe that single family offices, those that are larger, let's put it out there at $1 billion, are increasingly operating as of institutional quality. They're getting better people. Curiously, they're bringing people from the commercial wealth management business into those businesses. They're operating like real businesses. I think we need to take it in context that we're still in the early innings of the institutionalization of both the single family office and the multifamily office. And these creatures, regulatory creatures, are relatively new. And we are in the first generation of the ownership or the business transition from operating business to family office. So we're in an early period of time. I see increasing professionalization. I see increasing duty-bound principals who want to do good. So I think that comment is a snapshot in time that has passed. I don't think it's the future.
I hope you're correct. I kind of agree with both of you. At the $1 billion plus level, there is greater rigor and institutional. There is better benchmarking and the promise of best practices. There's more of a focus on paying the money to have the right people, systems, and technology. But I do agree that when you get maybe out of the investing arena and you get into the other things effectively on the capacity and capability within the family continuity, effectively governance, a lot of the issues looking more big picture at geopolitical, economics, and macro, I do think there are some weaknesses in terms of the gatekeeper approach of many family offices, kind of gatekeeping the world from their family. So I hate to sound so in the middle, but I'm kind of a little bit in the middle of kind of both of you. But perhaps that would be more of a thought leadership discussion we and other thinkers in the community, both SFO and MFO, could have at a different time. I do want to be respectful of your time, Jamie. I'm taking one quick look to see if there's a incredible question that came in that I should ask you. Tremendous comments. People really loved you, but I wouldn't say anything that I already asked, anything new. Thank you all for your comments and finding it interesting, especially anyone who says that I asked great questions. Thank you. Of course, that's the most important thing. Of course, I'm kidding. It's Jamie's responses that are always going to be the most valuable. Jamie, for those that would like to learn more about you and follow you either on social media or reach out to you and consider your consultative services, how could they do so?
Well, my website is www.jhmclaughlin.com. And I'm happy to take emails from anybody. My domain is the same thing, jamie@jhmclaughlin.com. So I'd welcome anybody's comments or inputs, good or bad.
I mean, there was one or two quick last questions. I don't quite get the context of one of them. I'd love to know Jamie's thoughts on how to get into an MFO. Do you mean get into by converting the SFO to an MFO? Or I'm an ultra high net worth person. I'm tired of RIAs. I'm too small for an SFO. How do I identify one of your 60 top MFOs? I'm going to take it, Matthew Mitchell, that was probably the gist of your question. How do I find out these 60, Jamie?
Well, I keep lists of the firms across all the archetypes, regulatory archetypes. And, this is part of the work that I do. My taking stock of the landscape, I help families find the right providers. And glad to learn more from the questioner. If he's actually interested in joining an MFO, beginning that process to talk to some of the leading firms is another enterprise entirely. I'm just not sure how what the intent of the question was, Angela.
I agree. So, again, you could find Jamie. Are you also on LinkedIn?
I sure am. Yep.
Okay. So I highly recommend LinkedIn. It's a great way to connect with people. I'm going to make the assumption, at least occasionally, Jamie checks his DMs, but you could also, again, go to his website and reach out to him. Or worst case, if you just get confused on all of that, reach out to me and note you would like for me to pass on your information to Jamie, and I will. Oh, one last question, Kevin White. Interesting. Is the premium on sourcing deals or capital? Again, I may not have enough context on that, but let's go with it.
I think that gets to something we said in the middle of the interview. I believe the shortcoming of most of the commercial providers is that they haven't really operated as allocators, and they haven't had historic access to best performing, excess returning, presumptively, funds or direct investments. I think it's a real shortcoming. Acting as a principal, as I mentioned before, under the presumption that they self-identify as fiduciaries has been a non-starter for them. But I do think there's a deficiency in their delivering on the promise that they can provide excess returning illiquid investments on a systematic basis. So, I'm in favor of, in some portion of what they do, that they could act fully disclosed as a principal in some fashion, meaning that they could, in fact, take a performance fee for a given investment that they would choose. That would put them in a position to be more competitive as an allocator with other firms that are in the business of allocating capital, whether they're private capital players, hedge fund managers, or the like. So from the standpoint that I see opportunity, I think it's an opportunity for them to allocate their capital differently and then run up against this issue that I've said, that their self-identity as a fiduciary might be something that they're going to need to explore and reframe why delivering as an allocator on illiquids in a manner in which they might act as a principal is in better alignment with their clients' needs.
And of course, now that we're wrapping up, there appears to be a flood of questions and comments. So I'm going to make the assumption some of you may have come in late to the conversation. The good news is I do this for free. It's on all my social platforms except for Instagram. I don't know how to tie in StreamYard to that yet, but this will be replayed as a video on LinkedIn, my YouTube, Twitter, apparently even Twitch. I think Rumble, I'm not sure. So very simply, once we're done, within probably 10 seconds, it is completely up as a video that you could absorb and enjoy. Jamie, I did get the context of Matthew's prior question on getting into an MFO wrong. He meant, because he gave me some clarity now, he meant as a senior executive. So let's make the assumption that Matthew is talented. Matthew, I'm going to assume that you're good. How do I get among those 60 MFOs to be aware of who I am and get kind of my resume in their hands?
Well, that's a good question. I'm glad to share a list of firms that I keep, so at least you have a roadmap and understand what I think are the real deal. It's interesting. There is right now within that group of, like, again, the category is around 60. I believe they are beginning to go through a rotation of their models where they are finishing adding non-revenue bearing C-level staff across a whole host of areas, whether it's a chief operating officer, a chief financial officer, chief human resources officer, and the like. There is a demand to add, these are investments, non-revenue bearing C-level people as these firms emerge in more institutional character. So certainly there are some seats at the table, but for most of them, they're promoting from within. They're identifying next generation high potential people that could in fact fill those roles, and they're breeding their next level of C-level people. But there's a class of firms that are still in that process of building out their C-level infrastructure. So I actually think it's a good time to be talking to them if you have the ability to deliver on some theater of operation that would be of a non-client facing, non-revenue bearing nature.
And Matthew, you are funny. You go, that's a big assumption. No, it's not, Matthew. I'm sure you're very talented. So have the confidence. And really, there's no such thing as confidence because you can't measure it. It's competence. If you're competent, you can get a lot done if you have the discipline and you have the wherewithal to move forward. So again, feel free to reach out to any of us. It's not as much my bailiwick per se, although this is giving me ideas about maybe a future, what I would call masterclass, a multi-day deep dive. Now, in my little parting comment, Jamie, we didn't have enough time to get into, and again, the whole term, as you noted, MFO is very bastardized, but probably the true definition going back even decades is a small collective of like-minded families banding together and sharing their capability and their resources. That may mean 2 families, it may mean 3 or 4, but they don't necessarily have a mission to become more of a commercial enterprise per se. Maybe they do morph into that. Very, very little research, perhaps they don't want research done on them, has been done kind of on that subset of a so-called, do we create together a private trust company? Do we work under that auspice? Again, another discussion for a different time. I've taken enough of your time today.
Well, I'll comment on that quickly if I can, Angelo. I think it's very important to recognize there was an informal confederating process of co-sourcing, co-diligencing, and sharing that went on between and among families, curiously within regions and within industry groups. So that is a fairly large group of entities, single family offices that just confederate together on an informal basis, is increasingly formal. So they haven't shared capital, they haven't shared governance, but they are clearly sharing information and various diligence and investing programs. So that's a pretty mature market phenomena.
Indeed. And then sometimes they really do, quote unquote, band together. And in theory, yeah, of course, they should be following guidelines. And if they need to register or form a private trust company or whatever they need to do, they absolutely should be following the rules. In terms of my closing, it was great to have a conversation with Jamie. I've known him for many years and respect him. I've learned so much today. I do realize from the comments and questions that I get in that this topic appears to be a touching point for many people. Inevitably, if you're in an SFO, you're going to be intrigued by what the other side in an MFO looks like, or if you're a family member, potentially, again, that question inevitably will almost always come up. We touched on, I think, the big points relative to the topic, but again, this is something where you should reach out to Jamie. You should engage more thoughtfully, and he would provide the value that you need in terms of getting the right information, a little bit of market research and all that in terms of making a proper decision. Again, everyone, I'm Angelo Robles. You could follow me at Family Office TV and at Family Office on YouTube. I'm extremely active on LinkedIn, apparently Twitch, Twitter, and really all platforms. And I'm extremely active and opinionated, right or wrong. So you're definitely going to get an active social media feed. And to really dive into the private community that I offer and my exclusive masterclasses, just simply go to angelorobles.com and have a chance to look things over, reach out to me. I'm happy to be a resource. Again, Jamie McLaughlin, thank you so much for your time. I look forward to the next time. Thank you.